So there's a poem I remember hearing in school when I was growing up titled "The Road Not Taken" by Robert Frost. In the poem, a traveler comes across a path that was diverging into two. And this traveler is in a dilemma regarding which path to choose. The last stanza of the poem goes like this: I shall be telling with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged into a wood, and I took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. I think this poem has stuck with me over the years because of the lesson that it teaches about decision making. And that is that the decisions that we make along the journey of life matter. And because they matter, that makes the journey just as important, if not more so, than our destination. Our passage for this morning is Psalm 49. Psalm 49 touches on some big truths about the journey of life on this earth. One of the things it touches on is death. There's a saying that there are only two things that are certain in life: death and taxes. Well, it's actually only partly true. People can evade taxes. No one can evade death. Everyone's journey on this earth is going to end in physical death. Now, this creates a difficulty for us because as human beings, our desire is to live. It's for life. And so for life to continue, for our desire to be met, death must be dealt with. A second thing that Psalm 49 touches on is the topic of money. The story goes that when John D. Rockefeller died, he was the first billionaire in America, a reporter asked his accountant, how much did John D. leave? His accountant's reply, all of it. We come into this world with nothing, and we will leave with nothing. Now, human beings tend to look to money, wealth, and possessions for security, satisfaction, and significance. Of course, money and material things are needed for physical life to flourish here on earth. Jesus even said, your Father knows that you need them. Jesus actually speaks more about money than he does about any other topic, including prayer. He does this because the issues money creates are not just issues for the wealthy, but they affect all of humanity. There's a fundamental principle about reality that Jesus, along with all of the biblical authors, take, and that is that God owns everything. He owns our money, our possessions, and even our own lives. And so if God owns everything, then that makes us ultimately accountable to him. Throughout the book of Psalms, there's a contrast between two groups of people, labeled the righteous and the wicked. We see that right away, beginning in Psalm 1, and we'll see it here this morning in Psalm 49. Very simply, the righteous are those who trust God. The wicked are those who don't trust God, but put their trust in something else. And most of the time, that something else is money. What or who we put our trust in this life is a big decision. It's actually the biggest decision we will ever make. Because what we choose to put our trust in is a matter of life and death. Not just for life here on this earth, but for life after death. Now, there's a lot to unpack in this psalm, but I've boiled it down to this. The path to true life, both here on earth and especially after death, cannot be found apart from a trusting relationship with God through Jesus Christ. The path to true life, both here on earth and especially after death, cannot be found apart from a trusting relationship with God through Jesus Christ. I've titled this morning's message, the path to redemption. And I've broken it down into 3 parts for us. The first part is the wisdom of God, which we'll look at. The second part is the certainty of death. And then the third part, the path to redemption. So we'll look at the wisdom of God in verses 1 to 4, the certainty of death in verses 5 to 12, and the path to redemption in verses 13 to 20. So let's begin with verses 1 through 4 of Psalm 49. Hear this, all peoples. Give ear, all inhabitants of the world, both low and high, rich and poor together. My mouth shall speak wisdom. The meditation of my heart shall be understanding. I will incline my ear to a proverb. I will solve my riddle to the music of the lyre. So Psalm 49 is a wisdom psalm, okay? What helps us to know that is that in verses 3 and 4, there's 4 different words used for wisdom. And what the psalmist is about to say is something that he has thought deeply about. But it's not his own insight, it's wisdom from God, which is meant to be heard by every human being. Those with status, those without status, rich, poor, and everyone in between. Wisdom, okay, simply put, is the skill of living life well. Wisdom is the skill of living life well. And God's wisdom, preserved for us in the Bible, is timeless, it's accurate, it's universal, it's practical, and it's always relevant. God's wisdom, biblical wisdom, is always right, and it never changes. Proverbs 1:8 says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And in the book of Proverbs, wisdom is at times contrasted with wealth. And when compared to wealth, wisdom is always shown to be more valuable than wealth. For instance, in Proverbs 3, it's written, "Blessed is the one who finds wisdom and the one who gets understanding. For the gain from her is better than gain from silver, and her profit better than gold." Now, the specific wisdom that's presented here in Psalm 49 is intended to teach a right attitude and perspective towards money. It serves as a warning to the rich, or even anyone who would desire to become rich. And it serves as a message of hope to the poor. So let's continue reading in verse 5, which I've subtitled this section, "The Certainty of Death." Why should I fear in times of trouble, when the iniquity of those who cheat me surrounds me, those who trust in their wealth and boast of the abundance of their riches? Truly no man can ransom another or give to God the price of his life, for the ransom of their life is costly and can never suffice, that he should live on forever and never see the pit. For he sees that even the wise die, the fool and the stupid alike must perish and leave their wealth to others. Their graves are their homes forever, their dwelling places to all generations, though they called lands by their own names. So the psalmist begins his teaching with a rhetorical question in verses 5 and 6. He looks around and he observes that many unrighteous people, some of whom are rich and powerful, are living an easy life. In Old Testament times, there was a teaching which said that bad things happen to bad people here on earth, while good blessings are for the righteous. But the reality of what he sees around him does not appear to line up with that teaching. Now, there's 2 words used here in verse 6 that I want to draw our attention to, and those are the words trust and boast. Okay, these words were typically used in Psalms to exhibit praise toward God. And so those who trust and boast of their wealth are those whose ultimate security and value lie in their money and possessions. And it's here we begin to see the contrast between the righteous and the wicked. The psalmist represents the righteous person who trusts in God, and those who seem to be prospering around him at the expense of others are the wicked who trust in their wealth. Now, I just want to note that the psalmist is not saying that there is inherently anything wrong with wealth, okay? There's actually a good chance that the psalmist had some level of wealth himself. But what he is warning against is trusting in wealth because of what excess money tends to foster, which are things like pride, greed, selfishness, and earthly distractions, all of which are addictive and lethal to the soul. In verses 7 to 9, we get an indication as to what this psalm is all about. Now, the word ransom is used here as a verb in verse 7, and it's repeated in verse 8 as a noun, okay? The word here, in other translations, I think it's better translated redeem, okay? Redeem is an economic term which literally means to buy back, okay? Redemption is the act of exchanging something valuable, could be money or service, okay, or even life, for something or someone that is endangered or doomed. The word infers rescuing or deliverance from something dangerous. The danger is the pit, it's death. What these verses are saying is that there is nothing that any human being can do to pay the price for death. There is no amount of money on earth that could ever suffice for life to continue beyond the grave. Now, in verse 10, it says that the person who trusts in wealth even sees with their own eyes that wealth is of no value after death. Yet they still choose to trust in it as if it could buy their way out of death. They cling to an illusion. Verse 11 says they called lands by their own names as if they were going to live on and hold on to that land forever. Now, obviously, this happens on a subconscious level. Most people don't say that money is going to help them live forever, except probably for a few wealthy elite who are trying to freeze their bodies to come back in the future at some point. But generally, those who trust in wealth, what they do is they forget about death, as if it were never going to happen to them. And so the pursuit of wealth becomes an illusion and a distraction, because not only can it never satisfy in this life, but it does no good after death. And this is the danger of wealth. And this is the danger and the warning of Psalm 49. It can create a false sense of security that blinds one to reality. Verse 12 ends this section with the conclusion that death is the destination for all those who trust in wealth. And left to our own, human beings have no way to escape death. We need to be rescued from it by something, or someone rather, outside of ourselves. And this takes us to the third part of this psalm, which I've subtitled The Path to Redemption. Verse 13. This is the path of those who have foolish confidence. Yet after them people approve of their boasts. Like sheep they are appointed for Sheol. Death shall be their shepherd, and the upright shall rule over them in the morning. Their form shall be consumed in Sheol, with no place to dwell. But God will ransom my soul from the power of Sheol, for he will receive me. Be not afraid when a man becomes rich, when the glory of his house increases. For when he dies, he will carry nothing away. His glory will not go down after him. For though while he lives, he counts himself blessed, and though you get praise when you do well for yourself, his soul will go to the generation of his fathers, who will never again see light. Man in his pomp, yet without understanding, is like the beasts that perish. Now, in verse 13 and the first part of verse 14, we're taught that death is not only the destination of those who trust in their wealth, but that death is also what they get along the journey of life. The path they choose is a path of lifeless and worthless pursuits. Verse 14 here is using figurative language, and in the second half of this verse, the contrast between the righteous and the wicked comes back into view with the words, the upright shall rule over them in the morning. Okay? The upright are the righteous, those who do not trust in wealth, but instead trust in God. Verse 15, it's worth repeating, but God will ransom my soul from the power of Sheol, for he will receive me. Okay? Now the word ransom or redeem here that is used is the same word, same verb used back in verse 7. Okay? And recall back in verses 7 to 9 that the psalmist taught that there is no amount of money on earth that can pay the price to deal with death. And here in verse 15, the primary theme of this psalm comes back into play. Redemption. And it's only possible with God. The Hebrew word used as receive here in the ESV literally means took. It's the same word used in Genesis 5:26, where it's written, Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Okay? Enoch being one of two people in the Bible who never experienced death. One translation puts it this way, of verse 15, God will snatch me from the power of the grave. Now, the psalmist doesn't say how God's going to do it. He just says that he will. His trust is in God. And the text doesn't say this, but there's no other explanation other than for the psalmist to have had this level of confidence in God, other than to say that he experienced God on a personal level. And he knew to the core of his being that God was trustworthy and good and would not let him perish. Verses 16 to 19 reiterates the futility of trusting in wealth, despite how successful it may look like in this world. And then verse 20 ends this psalm saying that wealth without wisdom is useless. As I've meditated on this psalm, I noticed that there's a question that sort of kind of lurks in the background, and that is this. Why does death have to be dealt with? Why can't we just live and die, and then our souls just move on to the afterlife? The answer is because if that were true, then there would be no justice. And all the evil and all the suffering that exists in the world would go unpunished. And God wouldn't really be good. But I suppose someone could then ask, okay, well then why doesn't God just send the good people to heaven and the bad people to hell? And the answer is because on our own, without God, there is no one who is truly good. And because God is holy and righteous, God and sinful humanity cannot coexist. And so what God chose to do was step in and make a way. And the good news of the gospel is that God did deal with death by sending his son, Jesus Christ, down to earth, fully God, fully man, to live a sinless life, to die on a cross, and pay the debt of sin that every human being owes for falling short of God's holy and righteous standard. And then he rose from the dead, defeated death, so that whosoever would believe in his name would not perish, but have everlasting life. And for anyone who puts their trust in Jesus Christ, God promises to rescue and put that person on the path to redemption. Now, here's the thing. If you're here this morning and you have yet to put your trust in Jesus Christ, God is inviting you to come on to the path to redemption. But until you get on that path, by entering into a trusting relationship with God through Jesus Christ, the path that you are currently on will lead to death. And not just physical death, eternal death. Eternal separation from the God of the universe and everything that is good. And I would plead with anyone here who is yet to put their trust in Christ to at least consider the offer and consider the kindness of God to reach out his hand. Because if you'll just grab on, he promises to save you. But for those of us who have put our trust in Jesus Christ, then regardless of the circumstances in our lives, we are already on the path to redemption. And so the question becomes, how then are we living in response to this good news? So, 3 things to consider as we continue walking on the path to redemption. The first point is this: pursue a trusting relationship with God through Jesus Christ. Pursue a trusting relationship with God through Jesus Christ. The psalmist had confidence in God to rescue him from the power of death because he experienced God in a personal way. When we do this, God becomes our security, our satisfaction, and in whom we find significance. Because what we find when we spend time with God is a loving Father who is willing to show us the right way to live and guide us on the path to true everlasting life. David says it this way in Psalm 16, verses 9 to 11. Therefore my heart is glad, and my whole being rejoices. My flesh also dwells secure. For you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, or let your Holy One see corruption. You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. Now look, vacations, hobbies, things we enjoy doing, even church and Bible studies are all good things that we should be grateful for. But nothing compares to a personal relationship with God through Jesus Christ. And that's because when you get God, you get everything else that you need. God doesn't just give wisdom, he is wisdom. He doesn't just make a way, he is the way. And he doesn't just give life, he is life. And when the storms of life, when the troubling times come, we can trust he'll see us through one way or another. Because he's a God who makes himself known, and he's good, and he's trustworthy. And he proved it by overcoming the power of death through the saving work of Jesus Christ so that we can live. The second point is this: choose the path to wisdom over the path to wealth. Choose the path to wisdom over the path to wealth. We get wisdom simply by asking God for it. James 1:5 says, if anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. James also tells us what the path to wisdom versus the path to wealth looks like. First, here's what the path to wealth looks like. This is James 3, verses 14 to 16. It says this: but if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. This is what the path to wealth looks like when it's lived out. It fosters jealousy, selfishness, pride, and futility. The path to wisdom looks like this, the very next verse, James 3:17. The wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. The path to wealth leads to self-centeredness and death. The path to wisdom leads to others-centeredness and life. As it's written in Deuteronomy, therefore choose life, that you and your offspring may live. The third and final point is this: lay up treasures in heaven over treasures on earth. Lay up treasures in heaven over treasures on earth. There's a parable that Jesus tells in Luke 12, which we refer to as the parable of the rich fool. Jesus tells the parable to warn his audience about the dangers of going after wealth. The parable goes like this: the land of a rich man produced plentifully, and he thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. The error of the rich fool was that he laid up treasures on earth only, thinking it would satisfy and secure his soul. But he was really just left spiritually bankrupt. There's nothing wrong with saving, putting money into 401ks, taking vacations, and setting financial goals. The error comes when we begin to hoard these things, thinking, even subconsciously, that they can bring us any real type of security or satisfaction. When it comes to money, to lay up treasures in heaven means to give it away to those who need it more. Now, finding the balance to this is hard. Okay, it has to begin with our relationship with God. What can also help us discern the balance so that we're laying up treasures in heaven is keeping with an eternal perspective. Now, on the screen should be a dot and a line, which signifies two phases. Our present life here on earth is the dot. It begins, it ends, it's brief. However, from the dot, a line extends that goes on forever. That line is eternity, which Christians will spend in heaven. Right now, we're living in the dot. But the question becomes, what are we living for? The short-sighted person lives for the dot, but the person with perspective lives for the line. This earth and our time here is the dot. Jesus and our eternal home, where we will be with God and others for the rest of eternity, is the line. The person who stores up treasures on earth that will end up in junkyards. The person who lives for the line lives for treasures in heaven that will never end. I want to end here with this. When we die, each of us will stand before God, and we will give an account of our lives. For those who have put their trust in Jesus Christ, then awaiting us is an eternal home with God for the rest of eternity. But right now, we're still here on this earth. And so while we're here, let's make it our aim to live well, to pursue God in our daily lives, to ask God for wisdom, and to lay up treasures in heaven, treasures that will last forever. Our hope is that there is coming a day when death will be no more, when the tears are wiped from our eyes, and where there will be no more mourning or crying or pain anymore, and in which the former things of this life on earth will pass away, and for which God will replace them with a new heaven and a new earth. And when we get to heaven, and stand before God, may we all get to hear it said, "Well done, my good and faithful servants." And then we will go on to dwell with God and his people for the rest of eternity. And that's our future after death.